Having brought video games back from extinction, Nintendo was enjoying incredible success with its NES. Not everyone was happy about that. Others wanted a piece of the pie. And so in 1989, there emerged a new challenger in the US. A black box, accompanied with a blue hedgehog that collected rings and chaos emeralds. It was the opening shot in the great console wars of the 1990s. The battle lines were drawn. Dueling advertisements lured kids and clueless parents alike. After all, the tagline was Sega does what NintenDONT. And so, 25 years later, we look back with fond nostalgia to the Sega Genesis, right here on Downloadable Content. Sega! Downloadable Content. I'm Brian, and with me we have a much smaller panel from the last episode. It's just Shanna right now.
Hi, everybody.
She's the only one that did not run away screaming after the PAX episode. So
You still got me for a bit.
I do, yes. Well, we were just talking before we started recording, and I mentioned that there are a lot of my friends were not full-on Sega people. Most of my friends were firmly on the Nintendo side during the 90s. Although I did cross the line a little bit when I was a kid, dabble a little bit there. So I did play both sides of the fence.
But yeah, I mean, that was a definite thing back then. You don't really have that as much now. I mean, people kind of are more neutral, and they see the merits of they'll see the merits of the Sony, they'll see the merits of the Xbox, and then they'll see the merits of the Wii U. Back then, you had to choose a side.
Oh, yeah.
It was you were a Sega kid or you were a Nintendo kid.
Absolutely, and I see articles written now about the console wars between PS4 and Xbox One, and I'm like, please.
They're not wars.
Please. They've got nothing. I mean, games nowadays, there's almost no such thing as exclusive titles anymore.
Exactly.
I mean, we're now a few months into the PS4 and the Xbox One. We're almost 6 months in, and there are very, very few exclusive titles between the two. Whereas Nintendo and Sega in the 90s, there were a lot of games that if you did not own either one of those consoles, you weren't playing.
Exactly.
Period. You were not gonna find Mario on a Sega console. You were not going to find Sonic on You were not going to find Sonic on Nintendo. You're not going to find Mario on Sega. Although that would, Mario and Sonic the Olympic Games. That was when Sega would stop making consoles, and Nintendo officially won the war with that.
Yeah.
But
that was when Sonic seceded.
It was like, that's it. I'm done. I'm done. But yes, so we start off with the Sega Genesis, which came out a little bit of a misnomer. Sega Genesis came out in 1988 in Japan, so technically it is 26, but it came out in 1989 here in the United States, which is why we're doing the 25th anniversary of the U.S. release of the Sega Genesis. So we've got plenty to talk about. All of my experience with the Sega Genesis as a kid, now I was firmly entrenched on the Nintendo side. I owned an NES. My stepbrother had a Super Nintendo, so we were playing that a lot. The only times I really got to play a Genesis were at either friends' houses, cousins' houses, or I would borrow a friend's Genesis for a weekend and, play that. But I mean, I never owned a Sega Genesis until I was in high school, and by then we had, PS2 and GameCube.
Yeah, I got my Genesis. I think it was the Christmas that I was 8 years old. That was the beginning of my life as a gamer. Was getting that system in my house, and the original Sonic the Hedgehog started it all. Because it came with that was the thing back then. Like you'd get a console and a game would come with it. So it came with the original Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, I mean that was the thing. Nintendo did the same thing, and now they're trying to make a little bit of that come back. I mean, we just heard news earlier this week that Nintendo, the Wii U, is putting out a Wii U bundle with 2 games. But now that's more of a novelty now than it was back in the 90s, where consoles came with games.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least one to start you off with, and then you'd progress from there. But
yeah, I mean now it's things like now you have to buy the console separately and a game separately, and it's a complete money grab. I know, but
hey, it's still a business.
It's still a business. So, I mean, let's go right into it. I mean, anytime most people, when you say Sega, they immediately think Sonic the Hedgehog, and the first Sonic the Hedgehog game came out in 1991.
Yep, I remember it like it was yesterday. It's like you turn on the console, he runs by the screen and the Sega logo pops up, and then it just, you start.
Sega!
Exactly. And, I mean, I just remember that game being so colorful and so alive, and like you start up at the Green Hill Zone and just the music starts up and all of a sudden these little fly robots are coming at you and it's on. And I don't know, I mean, maybe it's because I didn't grow up with a Nintendo. That's where my nostalgia comes from, is that game. And I just remember being visually immersed in that game.
The very first Sega Genesis game I ever played was Sonic 2, which is still my all-time favorite Sega game, period. I did not beat Sonic 1 until much later. But when I went back, after playing Sonic 2 and going back to Sonic 1, there was some fundamental differences, for example.
Oh, absolutely.
Fundamental differences, in Sonic 1, I was just like, hey, how come Sonic can't do the spin dash?
You would just sit there in vain, holding down the D-pad on down and B, and being like, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working?
Why isn't it working? But no, you'd have to, there were elements, especially in the Green Hill Zone, where you had to break blocks by Sonic getting a running start down a hill,
and then just hitting the down button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spikes were instant death in Sonic 1. And, it was a lot of fun. And each, I think it was 3 acts.
Yeah, Sonic 1 had 3 acts as opposed to all the other games that came after that had 2.
And the thing is about Sonic 1 is that you could see a lot of the things in Sonic 1 that would carry on to later Sonic titles. I mean, pretty much every single one started off with X Hill Zone.
Mm-hmm.
Green Hill, and then you had Emerald Hill, Sonic 2.
There was always a water level where you had to, rely on the bubbles to stay alive.
Yeah, I think that was Spring Yard Zone in Sonic 1.
I think it was the one after that.
Labyrinth?
The Labyrinth, yeah.
That was annoying.
Oh yeah, the Labyrinth was... It still drives me nuts to this day.
Especially the boss at the end of the 3rd act, where you have to keep moving up the board.
Yeah. Oh my god. I didn't beat that level, I'm not even gonna lie, until probably maybe 2 years ago.
Oh yeah, I mean it's very, very hard. And I mean it seemed you had Green Hill, Marble, Spring Yard, Labyrinth, Starlight, and then Scrap Brain.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was just called Final Zone. That was the
Right. And these were back in the good old days where he was still Dr. Robotnik.
Yes.
Before the whole Dr. Eggman thing. Which, I'm sorry, Robotnik wins for me every time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing about Robotnik was that was his Americanized name. To the rest of the planet, it was Dr. Eggman.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
It was Dr. Eggman to the rest of the in the original Japanese release. So in Japan, he's always been Dr. Eggman.
Okay.
So when we finally got Eggman, Robotnik being called Eggman in the United States, it was just like, what?
Exactly. I was like, what do you mean Eggman? Like, what is that?
What?
Well, the one place where that will always remain is one of my favorite. It's not a Sonic game, it's kind of an offshoot, but Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine.
That's a hard game.
It is hard, but it's fun.
Oh, it's fun.
It's fun. I mean, it's basically just Tetris with beans, but
or more specifically, Dr. Mario.
Yeah, or I didn't realize this until later. It's the same exact game as Kirby Avalanche. It's the exact same game. It's just they took Kirby and Kirby characters and replaced it with Dr. Robotnik and all of his minions.
Yeah, basically. So I mean, even though we had, the firm battle lines of the 90s, they were still very much stealing from each other.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
But, I remember the first boss in Sonic 1, and I thought it was a piece of cake. And I'm like, if this is how the game is going to be, this game is going to be finished very quickly.
Yeah.
That was a nice lure you in, false sense of security sort of thing. And then it's like, oh, shit. Let's ramp up the difficulty.
The Marble Zone did not play around. I remember, my parents would try to play it with me. They got so frustrated at the Marble Zone and, like, all of the lava and all of the jumping over the lava. Like, because you jump over those little platforms and then they would catch on fire. So you had to be super fast, and they were like, this game is so hard. This is for kids? Like, they couldn't handle it.
Interestingly enough, it wasn't that annoyed me about Marble Zone. There were two things that annoyed me about Marble Zone. One was the spikes from the ceiling.
Yeah.
And the little caterpillars with spikes all over their bodies, which meant you could only hit them on their heads.
You could either that or roll into them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it.
But the spikes dropping down from the ceiling were annoying, but the music was catchy as hell.
That's like a staple for the entire series. Every Sonic game had incredible music.
And, just from a social standpoint, I mean, for me, I had been used to Mario.
Yeah.
With, a lot of it's jumping, because, again, I had the NES, I owned Mario Brothers 1, and by this time 3 was out. So I'm used to just jumping over pits, and Mario, that was his big thing. He could jump high and he could jump far. Then you play this, and the big thing is speed.
Yep.
Sometimes so much speed that the Genesis had a hard time keeping up.
Yeah, that part was always fun. You would just be off screen, and it's like the Genesis is just kind of falling behind, like, oh, there he is. Okay. Which wasn't the only couple of times where the Genesis was trying to figure out what you were doing, because that happened a lot with Tails too. Tails would always kind of fall off or get lost or fall behind or die on a spike trap that you just jumped over. It just
Yeah, that was definitely Sonic 2. I mean, Sonic 1, you played only as Sonic. No sidekicks or anything like that. And, why the hell not? Move into Sonic 2. I think it took me 10 years to get past the Chemical Plant Zone Act 2.
Yeah, it's not easy with all the goo and everything.
Oh,
yeah.
There's that one point you get to in Act 2 where the goo rises and suddenly you're underwater.
Yep.
And I don't care what anybody says. I've played Resident Evil, I've played Silent Hill, I've played a lot of survival horror. There is nothing that scares me more in a video game than when you are about to drown.
That music. That music just still to this day, it makes my pulse start racing. It's like, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god.
It's like, okay, you have 11 seconds before you die, and good luck.
You just start like spamming the up and jump button as much as you possibly can. Like, get on the platforms. Oh god, get on the platforms.
There's an air bubble. Go get it.
Yeah, exactly.
And Sonic 2 obviously had the introduction of Tails, which, you know, if you had a second controller, they could play along with you.
Yep, me and my cousin used to do that.
And Tails had the benefit of infinite lives. However, if you were playing single player and left Tails on, you found out that Tails would be a horrible thing to have with you in the special stages.
Yeah.
You know, Sonic 1, you didn't have that problem. Sonic 1 is if you had 50 rings at the end of the board and jumped into that giant ring at the end, it would take you to this special stage where, you know, you just had to avoid hitting the a dead-end pathway.
Right. You didn't want to hit... Ironically, they were called goals.
Yeah.
But that was not your goal. You did not want to end up there.
Yeah. Whereas Sonic 2, if you had 50 rings anytime you passed a checkpoint, you could then enter the special stage, which was much more fast-paced. And if you had Tails with you, good luck. Because, you know, you would be collecting rings, and Tails would be just like a half-second behind. So if you moved in any direction, Tails would take about a half-second to follow, which sucked because the special stages were littered with bombs. So you as Sonic would jump out of the way only to have Tails get hit in the face with a bomb, and Tails losing, you know, all its rings that it collected.
Which essentially meant you lost all the rings that you collected. So I can't tell you how many times I'd be in that, like, you know, final lap, and I'm just about to get there, and you see the emerald in the distance. Tails gets knocked out, and I don't get it, and I'm like, I hate you.
and it would always be you would always miss by like 1 or 2 rings because of that.
Yeah, exactly.
So imagine my joy when I discovered the options menu and found out you could change the options to play as either Sonic by himself or Tails by himself.
Yep. It fixed everything.
And I was like, oh, that's how I finally managed to beat the game with all the Chaos Emeralds.
I still haven't beaten the game with all the Chaos Emeralds. I don't know why. For some reason, I feel bad if I don't have Tails with me. I don't know why. I know he's a hindrance, but I'm like, he's so cute. He just wants to help.
And it was just, he does, but, you know, I'm sorry, screw you. It's, you know, you're getting in my way.
It's funny, they didn't exactly fix that in Sonic 3 either, because I just remember the first... I think it's like towards the end of the first stage where they started to kind of amp it up and add little like cutscene sort of things. And when you're running towards the final, you know, the first boss of the first stage, like the first time you run into Robotnik, there's this plane that comes down that just starts dropping bombs. Like these missiles. And you can keep outrunning the missiles as Sonic, but Tails gets knocked out by them the entire time.
Yep.
Because they just did not program him to keep running to keep up with you. So you're sitting there outrunning all these missiles, and he's just getting his ass handed to him.
The only time I felt that Tails was actually very useful was in the sky zone in Sonic 2.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he had his plane lined up perfectly to Sonic jumping.
Yeah, which that was a cool new sort of that was a cool new thing that they put in. That was a different change up of how you're playing the game, so that was really fun.
But then you get to the final boss, the Death Egg Zone in Sonic 2, and you have to do the entire thing without rings.
Oh, God, I know. I'll admit, I still haven't beaten it to this day. I still haven't beaten any Sonic game to this day, to be honest. I've been playing them for years, and I still just, they're still so tough for me. I don't know what it is.
Well, I mean, the Death Egg Zone is very hard because you have two bosses, as you probably know, in that board. You have Metal Sonic,
Mhm.
or as I call him, Uncle Chuck.
Okay.
That's a nod to the animated cartoon.
Oh my God, which one? There was two of them.
Whatever one was on Saturday morning on ABC in the 90s.
Because there was two in the 90s, one of which was actually kind of like, it had like kind of a full cast in it. Like there was like a half metal rabbit and like, I think there was a like French gerbil or something, but like it actually got kind of dramatic. And then there was the one that was like on crack. That it was just really loud and obnoxious and crazy.
Yeah, I think it was just called, I'm trying to remember if if it was The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog.
I don't remember. Fun fact, though, in both shows, he was voiced by Jaleel White, by Steve Urkel.
By Urkel. So, which was a bit of a jump, because I remember watching Family Matters as a kid on Friday nights. But, be that as it may, I have beaten Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, we have Sonic and Knuckles. So now you have this new character who's red, and he's an echidna, and he can climb up walls. It was always great to play as him.
My favorite! I love Knuckles.
I played as Knuckles, but, I mean, there was just something I really enjoyed playing as Sonic. It just felt right. Knuckles, for a while, felt like an interloper.
Well, he had that whole, like, is he a bad guy or is he not a bad guy thing that I thought was really cool. Like, you didn't really know what his deal was. You just knew he was some kind of antagonist, but he wasn't with Robotnik. I don't know, I guess he was kind of like the bad boy of the series.
He was the anti-hero.
If you could say that, yeah. Even though I guess Sonic was supposed to be a bad boy himself with his little victory poses and whatnot.
So then we had, I think one of the things I remember most about Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles is the bonus stage where it was collect the spheres.
Oh yeah, and it would speed up throughout it. Like you'd go through it and you're like, all right, I got this. I got a rhythm. I can get all the blue spears. It's okay. And then all of a sudden there would be a speed jump, and then another speed jump, and then you're like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. And once you hit a bumper, it was over because it would just knock you into a red sphere. Done.
Yeah, that'd be like, and if you were really good on those bonus boards, you'd get a perfect.
Yeah.
Which was an automatic 50,000 points and an extra life on top of the Chaos Emerald. So, it was a lot of fun, and the music, again, just very catchy and very memorable.
Very memorable. I hear it right now in my head. Once you mentioned it, like the blue spheres, it popped up in my head.
So we'll shift away from Sonic because, I think we've spent 15 minutes now talking about Sonic, so...
Although, I will say, I think one of my favorite Sonic games is Sonic Spinball.
One of the few I haven't finished.
That one I pick up at least once a year. I don't know where they come up with the idea of taking Sonic the Hedgehog and pinball and putting it together, but it's absolutely genius. And it's so fun because, I mean... The whole point of it, it's kind of the same mechanics. You try to collect 3 emeralds and then you get to a boss fight. And you're basically controlling Sonic as a pinball. It's so much fun. And then the bonus levels were actually like Sonic sitting down actually playing a pinball game. Like you see his little shadow in the background and like you're actually playing an actual pinball. It was just so fun.
Yeah, I made it. I always get to the last level and I just cannot get past it.
Oh, it gets really tough. It gets super hard.
It gets very, very hard. And I know another one I haven't finished was Sonic 3D Blast.
Oh, me neither, but that was kind of on choice.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Yeah. So going on.
moving right along, one of the games that I used to borrow heavily from my friend whenever I went somewhere, like I would usually bring a Sega Genesis with me to my grandparents' house on Cape Cod, and there was a cartridge that was just the 10 pack, and it had 10 Genesis games on it. And it was on that game cartridge that I was introduced to Streets of Rage.
Amazing, amazing franchise.
Uh, and Streets of Rage is a side-scrolling beat 'em up. Um, and it again that was it was great. It was great if you played with two people, but getting through it on single player was quite a challenge.
I get so proud of myself on the few times that I did beat it on single player. I was like, I did it. It was like climbing a mountain. But yeah.
And then you play Streets of Rage 2, and it's like, oh crap.
I just like it's funny. I was just like looking up some stuff on that game like just before jumping on, and I completely forgot the names of the original main characters, which were so wonderfully cheesy.
So wonderfully 90s.
Their names are Adam, Axel, and Blaze.
Yep.
And Blaze is the chick.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, like I just remember the whole intro to that. Like it had this whole like. It almost looked like a Lethal Weapon movie or something would open up. It's like the cityscape, and it's like, oh, there's all these like crime syndicates in the city, and we've got to take it back or something like that. It was just so
yeah. It was like you half expected, Sylvester Stallone to come in or something and just tear up the game. But no, you had these players, and each one had their own various strengths and weaknesses. And when I beat Streets of Rage 1, I was like, yes, good, and I tried Streets of Rage 2, and the first thing I noticed was that they took your special weapon away.
Yeah, they did.
Which I relied heavily on that special weapon in boss battles.
But you got a kid with a skateboard, right? Or was he in the third game?
I've never played the third game. I have it. Because I recently bought the Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection on the PS3, and it's got...
Oh, wow.
and it's got, like, 40-plus Genesis games on it.
Yeah, I know, like, they definitely went off, like... They went off the deep end in terms of characters, because, like, I'm pretty sure the one I have upstairs in my big box cartridges is Streets of Rage 3, but I just remember it went from just having 3 normal people who were, like, cops or vigilantes or whatever to, like, you have a cyborg in there, you have a boxing kangaroo. It just kind of went a little bonkers.
Yeah, I mean, you had the first 2 games which you had, pretty normal characters, and then you have... the characters, you have Axel, Blaze, and Eddie, who's the Eddie Skate Hunter.
That's right, yeah, Eddie.
And yes, you have the kangaroo.
Yep.
It's like, okay, we're jumping the shark just a little bit here.
A kangaroo with boxing gloves.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was, now the thing I always forget, did that come first or did Final Fight come first? Because the games are very similar.
Well, let's consult Wikipedia. Final Fight.
Because that was also like a side-scrolling beat-em-up kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, Streets of Rage is just, it's a classic. I mean, the music was very urban. It had a very, like, sort of downtown dangerous feel to it, and like all of the guys that you beat up, like all of your enemies were like mohawked punk rockers and like chicks in leather. It was just so like...
Well, Final Fight came out on the Sega Mega CD in 1993.
Oh, okay.
Whereas the first Streets of Rage came out in the 90s, but I'll get you more specific on that in just a second. 91.
Okay, so
the Streets of Rage was first.
Came first. Cool. Okay.
Another game on that 10-pack that I love, and April loves, so much so that I downloaded it on the Wii when I got the Wii in Virtual Console. Columns.
Columns, I remember briefly. I remember it being on the same kind of thing. It was like this thing called like Sega Six Pack or something, which had like 5 or 6 different Sega
It
games
might have
in
been.
it.
It might have been the Sega Six Pack. I might. I'm thinking of thinking. I don't know why 10's jumping, but I think it was the Six Pack.
Maybe, yeah. But I do remember that game being on there, which was kind of like, was it like Tetris, kind of?
Yes.
Okay.
It was yet another in the long line of Tetris slash Dr. Mario.
Puzzle gaming knockoffs.
Yes, one of the many, many knockoffs of that. There was a game that sticks out in my head for being notoriously bad, but I enjoyed it immensely. It was a fighting game, and it was called Clay Fighter.
I do vaguely remember Clay Fighter. I remember that all the characters had silly names.
Yep.
If I'm correct. Yeah.
Like Bad Mr. Frosty, Blue Suede Goo,
Yep.
The Blob. I mean, originally it came out. Originally, at first, one of the examples of multi-platform, because it was on the Super Nintendo as well. It came out first on the Super Nintendo. Then it came out on the Genesis a year later. But yeah, it was this fighting game with a very loose tentative plot. The plot was that a meteor that was entirely made out of clay crash lands on the grounds of a humble American circus. The goo from the interstellar object contaminates all of the circus attractions, transforming them into bizarre caricatures of their former selves with new superpowers. I get the feeling this was like a bad Killer Instinct ripoff. Because, yeah, there was some characters that I remember I used to always play as the Blob. But I remember the names like Ichabod Clay.
Oh god, it's so bad.
Taffy. And the final boss was called N-Boss.
Just N-Boss?
N-Boss.
Ah.
Which was both a pun on the phrase End Boss and M. Bison.
Ah, man. Well, it was the golden age of fighting games, so they would take any excuse to make a fighting game, even something as silly as that.
Yeah, speaking of the golden age of fighting games, there's 2 more that come to mind. This one I only got to play on that wonderful thing that was way ahead of its time. Remember the Sega Channel?
Actually, I don't remember the Sega Channel.
Okay.
I never had it.
Okay, well, I'll
Yeah.
explain what the Sega Channel is. The Sega Channel, the best way I could probably describe it is it was a Netflix of Sega games. It was an actual adapter hooked up through... You got it through your cable company. And it was a special adapter that plugged into the Genesis, and it would connect to, some database, through your cable line, and every 2 weeks you would get a new lineup of Sega games to play. Every 2 weeks there'd be this rotating stock of games.
That's so ahead of its time. I mean, I had something similar to that, but it was called Blockbuster.
Well, yes.
That's how I got to play all my new games.
And, the Sega Channel always had a Sonic game, and there was just a huge range. It started in June 1993, and it lasted through 1998.
Oh, wow. That's a healthy shelf life.
Yeah, basically, this was the first, this was basically Virtual Console. It was a subscription service that you paid a monthly fee to your cable company, and it was great. And one of the fighting games I played on it was a fighting game called Balls.
I remember Balls. I never played it, but I remember it existing.
It had such cheesy music, like so incredibly 90s music, it was horrible. And all of the characters were made up entirely of balls. And there was the '90s, so we had that cool spelling where it was Ballz.
Of course it was. Just like Comic Zone with an X.
Yes, which I never played. I never played Comic Zone.
I didn't get to play it until I have actually like a anniversary Sonic disc that's for PS2. I think my dad got it for me for Christmas at some point. But I think if you play enough of a certain game, you unlock Comic Zone. Like, it's also got a couple of other Sega gems that are tossed on there.
I think I have one too. I have it for the GameCube. It was it's not necessarily Genesis. It's the Sonic Mega Collection, and it has a similar thing where if you play a game a certain amount of times, you will unlock.
I think that's actually. I think that might be the one I have, the Mega Collection. Now that I think about it.
And they do that. They do a similar thing for the Sonic Ultimate Genesis Collection with the 40 plus Sega games on it. But another fighting game that I played and disliked because the response time was so slow is Virtua Fighter.
Yeah, it was an early prototype of what was to come, I guess, with fighting games, but that was a ridiculously slow game.
Especially since I had already been playing for years Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter.
Yeah, no, exactly. It was like a very poor follow-up from those games.
Yet it's still around.
It is, I know. Surprisingly so.
For some reason, it still exists. Virtua Fighter 5 came out 2012. It's still going.
It's just weird because it's such a novelty, because the whole idea of what that game, that they wanted it to be, like more realistic or whatever, has come and gone. And it's surprising that it's lasted this long.
It was also, though, it was the first game that I played in which I was introduced to the concept of the ring out in a fighting game.
Oh, wasn't that cheap and amazing?
Oh, and it's a tactic I very, very much still employ whenever I play games like Soul Calibur.
Ditto, yeah. I'm like, oh wait, I actually don't need to knock down the health bar. Let me just keep spamming this one move until they fall off the stage.
Yeah. Like, hey, I win! Yeah.
Yay, cheap win!
Yeah, it counts.
Exactly.
Let's see.
Another
Go ahead.
Another 2D fighter that I remember was, because like I said, this is when it was all exploding, was Eternal Champions, which wasn't anything that special. It was just basically another another versus kind of game. But all I remember about it is I think that each of the characters came from a different time in history, so each level kind of looked like a different. Like, one was prehistoric, and then you had someone who's in the future, and then you had someone in the Dark Ages. I mean, it was okay, but I just kind of remember owning it, to be honest.
Oh, the heyday of fighting games in the 90s, it was great, because you got the ones that were really, really gory and bloody. You got Mortal Kombat. Oh, panic! Oh, violence! Oh, think of the children! And then you have games like, Clay Fighter and...
The ones that you go back and you pick up, like, all these years later, and you're like, oh, okay. I think I'll play Street Fighter instead.
Yeah. Basically.
Exactly.
As I was digging up titles, just thinking about games that I remember, there was one game that I played briefly, but April remembers it very fondly. Echo the Dolphin.
Oh, Echo the Dolphin made me mad.
Which I played. I played Echo the Dolphin on the Game Gear, so I never played the Genesis.
I played it on the Genesis, I think, once. All I remember is we rented it from Blockbuster. I brought it home. I could not figure out that I guess that there was a puzzle to it, because, I'm a kid, I'm impatient, I just want to start running and doing things. So I'm just like, I'm just swimming back and forth. What am I doing? This game is terrible, and I never picked it up again. So I didn't get to actually experience Echo the Dolphin, and it's one of those to-do things list, like on my to-do list now, where I'm like, you know what, I should pick that up again and actually play it and see what what I missed out on as a kid.
Yes. Echo the Dolphin. Yes, it's just right. Um, let's see. Another game that I played. It was also on the Super Nintendo, but I played my first encounter with it was on the Genesis, and it is considered probably one of the worst platforming games of all time, and that would be Bubsy.
I never played Bubsy, but I've heard terrible things about it.
Bubsy, clawed encounters of the furred kind, or something like that. And claws encounters of the furred kind, yes.
That's adorable.
Yeah. Um, it was weird, to say the least, because the game revolved around Bubsy, defending the planet's supply of yarn balls from aliens.
What?
Yeah, you had to collect yarn.
Who comes up with these things?
In this case, the studio Accolade. In Japan, because remember, most of our video games were still coming from Japan in the early 90s, so
That's true.
a lot of these catastrophic failures are games that, you laugh at, or you just, oh, Japan.
Yeah, that's the best way to counteract that. Oh, Japan.
Oh, Japan. The problem was with this game was that the hype for this game was very high. It got a lot of marketing because it was supposed to be billed as the next Sonic or Mario.
Yeah, okay.
According to Wikipedia, Bubsy himself even won Electronic Gaming Monthly's most hype for a character of 1993.
It's funny to think about that now. Like, there was a lot more emphasis on mascots back then.
Oh, yes.
Like, now you have characters that stick out based on their game, but you don't have, like, Master Chief. I mean, I guess you kind of have Master Chief representing the Xbox, but it's not like people synonymously go there, you know what I mean? Or you don't look at, like, other characters like Lara Croft and automatically think of a console. You just think of their games. Back then, you had a mascot, and that mascot represented, like, an entire enterprise. It was weird.
The last game we'll talk about before we cut to break was a game another one that I only played on the Sega channel. It was Vector Man.
Vector Man I have, and I think I've only picked it up 2 times, to be honest. My grandmother got it for me for Christmas one year, and I don't know if it just didn't jive with me or what, but I remember picking it up and just kind of being like, okay, and then I just never picked it up again.
It didn't appeal. I mean, obviously, you loved Sonic so much that you're like, where's the fast?
Maybe that's what it was. I don't know. I had other games that I was into too, but just for some reason, Vector Man just never really stuck out in my mind.
Well, the thing that I remember most about Vector Man, I didn't play much of it, but it was supposed to be Sega's answer to Donkey Kong Country.
Well, I could see that graphically wise. That was
the intent.
Yeah, like, I mean, it did look good for its time. I mean, it was very... But I think the fact that it was just... It's like that game Balls you were talking about. The fact that he was just basically like... He was just basically like a whole bunch of marbles. I mean, like, you put that next to Donkey Kong, and Donkey Kong kind of wins out in terms of, aesthetic appeal.
Oh, absolutely. So...
I mean, Donkey Kong looks like a fully realized character, and Vector Man looks like the beginning of a fully realized character that they haven't finished putting together yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. I could definitely see that. But yes. Alrighty. Well, we've spent a good chunk of time talking about games that we remember and love, and we will continue to do that in the second half, and we'll also, in the second half, talk about some of the peripherals that came with the Genesis later on in life, like Sega CD and the 32X. So that will be on our second half. So we'll continue this. But before we do, you will have a few minutes of music from some Sega title, as I have yet to think of. It'll just be on the fly, like I usually do. So, you are listening to Downloadable Content, talking about 25th anniversary of the Sega Genesis. We'll be back! Welcome back to Downloadable Content, talking about the 25th anniversary of the Sega Genesis. Shanna is still here. She hasn't run away. She's not trying to get some Chaos Emeralds or anything like that.
Well, now that you mentioned Chaos Emeralds, I'll see you later.
I'll see you later.
I'm messing.
Yeah. Drive through a traffic light with 50 rings. Maybe you'll warp into the special stage.
Ba-doo!
So, moving right along as we continue to talk about games that we remember with fond nostalgia, whether they were great, whether they were horrible. Shanna, we'll start with you. I know you had a couple.
Yeah, I'm going to start off with what I think, personal opinion, but I think is probably one of the greatest sports video games of all time, NBA Jam.
You know, a lot of people think that because from what I never played NBA Jam, but I know I have friends who hate sports games but love NBA Jam.
It's a classic. It's amazing. I mean, I grew up as a basketball fan. My dad's a big basketball fan, so I grew up with basketball in the house, and just picking up that game was phenomenal because it felt, the way they made you feel like you were playing the games that you watched on TV. I mean, it had real NBA players on it. At the time, the Chicago Bulls were like the most fearsome team that just won every year. So like they were always the hardest team to beat. All of these like NBA stars were, I mean, this was like the golden age of the NBA. I don't remember if Michael Jordan was in the game or not. I remember
I believe so.
I believe he is, which is crazy to think that he might not be, but he might have been like unlockable or something. But I mean, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, like I was a Knicks fan growing up, so I got to play as Patrick Ewing and John Starks, and that just made my life. But it was also the fact that like, you know, the announcements in it, like, you know, you're playing the game and there's an announcer going off the entire time, and just the classic phrases of, you know, he's on fire and boom shakalaka. I mean, it was just fantastic. And then to up the ante, you know, you actually did have He's on Fire, which was, I think if you did 3 consecutive if you made 3 consecutive shots, whether they were 3-point shots or 2-point shots, you would be on fire, which was literally your character was running around with a ball that's on fire. And every time he would shoot, and every time he would make the point, the basket would just burn up.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was one of the appeals of the game was that it wasn't a straight NBA game. It was kind of exaggerated, kind of like the Super Smash Brothers of the NBA. It was just
it was totally exaggerated. There was, I mean, you could play as Bill Clinton or Hillary Rodham Clinton at some point. Like they would just stick their heads on their bodies. It was totally exaggerated, but it wasn't exaggerated to the point of like, oh God, I can't remember the name of another game, but there was some really tough basketball player who had like an extreme basketball game where you would like knock people out or some crap. I can't remember it now, but it was still an essential basketball game, but it had these little quirks to it that made it so much fun.
I'm taking a look at Wikipedia now. Yeah, players could jump many times above their own height.
Oh yeah, you would just do backflips and stuff in the air. Like you would somersault and do a dunk.
So, Space Jam.
Basically, yeah.
No fouls,
Nope.
free throws, no violations except goaltending and the shot clock violation.
Yep.
And there's the on fire feature. Although I'm liking what I'm reading about the Easter eggs. Like you could unlock hidden characters like Bill Clinton.
Yep.
And Mortal Kombat characters.
Mm-hmm. It was the perfect mix of like playing like a Madden game but for basketball and kind of just having these wacky other elements thrown into it. It's a classic.
Yeah, I never played NBA Jam.
And then another good basketball game, which is completely silly at this point, is Charles Barkley's Shut Up and Jam, which I have that too. And that one was more of like, you know, if NBA Jam was the actual NBA and it's like watching a professional sport, Shut Up and Jam was like street ball. It was Charles Barkley playing with a whole bunch of characters with names, and I kid you not, like Funky D and Chili and Sweet Pea and Smoothie and you would like pick a city and you would end up playing it something like, you know, at the roof of a building or on a beach or some crap. And Charles Barkley would smack talk you through the entire game. Like his actual voice. You would hear him going like, put the ball down or something like that. It was so silly.
Oh God, the 90s.
It's incredibly 90s, right down to the fact that it's all MIDI hip hop in the soundtrack. It's hilarious.
And by hilarious, you mean terrible, but...
The thing is, the gameplay, I recall, was actually pretty good. Like, the controls were well, it's fun to play, but it's totally dated, but dated in a good way.
And you probably still play it to this day.
Yep, every once in a while, I dust it off and pop it in the Genesis.
Yep, go right ahead. Not a problem with that. Well, good. Good. Another game that I remember fondly, and only one of the few Genesis games I beat outside of, you know, the Sonic games, was Gunstar Heroes. And Gunstar Heroes, actually, I did not get introduced to this game until the Wii Virtual Console. I think it was Ben who showed me this game. Gunstar Heroes is made by Treasure. It's made by the same people who brought you Ikaruga. And it's a run-and-gun side-scroller. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Mega Man.
Okay.
You have to go through 4 levels. I forget, is it 4 levels or 6? Whatever. It's... You know, there's a difference in story between the Japanese version and the United States version.
I'm looking at it right now, because I never got to play this game.
It's a lot of fun. It kind of reminds me of Metal Slug.
It definitely looks a bit like Mega Man to me, just from looking at it.
But yeah, I was introduced to it on the Virtual Console, and it's a lot of fun. Some of that stuff carries over into Ikaruga, which is a GameCube game, so... Um, let's see.
Oh wow, looking this up, it looks like Complex magazine actually named it as their top Sega game of all time.
Yeah, it's actually very, very widely acclaimed. So, I would suggest you get it. I mean, like I said, it is available on the Virtual Console for the Wii. So,
I have to hit that up.
another game that I remember on that lovely 6-pack cartridge was Golden Axe.
Lovely, lovely Golden Axe.
Which I never finished. I have come close. I have come close to beating that game. And again, it's another one of those side-scrolling games which, it's easier if you have 2 people.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I want to say it was just this past Thanksgiving-ish. We had a friend over, our friend Colin came over, and we downloaded all of them, and me and Colin just ran through these games like one after another. But yeah, it's definitely a very fun game to play co-op.
I mean, it's a lot of fun to play single player as well, but keep in mind, it's going to be hard.
Well, the thing I love about Golden Axe is it's basically like someone basically took a side scroller like Streets of Rage and just sprinkled D&D all over it.
Yes.
I mean, you play as either a barbarian, an Amazon, or, for lack of a better word, Gimli. Like, you run around as a dwarf with an axe.
But I also think he's the wizard.
Well, yeah, you're right, because you do get magic. So I think he is the magic user.
I wasn't thinking so much D&D as more Conan.
Yeah, you're right, it is more Conan the Barbarian.
As opposed to D&D, because I don't usually see characters like what's depicted on the box art in D&D.
Yeah.
They look way too muscly.
They're very muscly. Every ounce of this game is just like muscles and brawn.
Which is funny because, I mean, the box art, you look at it and you see the 3 characters that you can play as, and they're all just beefcake.
Yeah.
And then you play the game and it's just sprites.
They're cute little sprites, though.
Yeah, they're cute little sprites. One of the things I remember most about that game are the little imps that have sacks of magic.
Oh yeah.
And
you have the little I guess they're like bonus levels in between where you beat them up because they steal your stuff and then you get extra stuff.
Yeah, you get magic, and if the blue imps gave you magic, the green ones gave you like turkey legs or whatever. And
yeah, like whatever healing items you needed. Yeah.
Although, just the funny thing is the names of the characters. The dwarf is Julius Thunderhead.
What? Okay.
The male barbarian is called Axe Battler. And the lady, the Amazon, Tyrus Flare.
Those are fantastic.
Yes.
Those are all like metal band names.
They all, yes. And you have to kill the final boss. His name is Death Adder.
Yeah, Death Adder, I remember.
So it's definitely high fantasy, and it was a lot of fun. Like I said, I've come really close to beating it.
The other thing I remember that stuck out to me about that game was the fact that you had mounts. Like, you'd be running through and all of a sudden, like, one of the bad guys would be, like, riding a dragon. If you knock him off the dragon, you could steal it. And you could ride around and breathe fire on people.
Yes.
That was always fun.
But by the same time, they could also attack you and take it back.
Exactly. But it upped the ante. It gave you, it added another level to the gameplay that was really, really fantastic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely. It was a great hack-and-slash game. And, I mean, it was definitely... I mean, the producer of the game was very much inspired by Conan the Barbarian and wanted to make a game, in that sort of vein. He also created another game called Altered Beast.
Oh, Altered Beast.
Altered Beast, which is set in ancient Greece, and you play a soldier, you play as a centurion, You play as a dead guy, actually. You're resurrected by Zeus to rescue Athena. And each level, you gain power-ups, and once you reach a certain level, you can then transform into beasts.
Now, I didn't realize that this had the whole Greek background in it, but I never got to play it. It was one of those games where I saw people playing it, but I never really got to play it myself.
It's it's another one that I haven't beaten because, I mean, again, a lot of these games were still on the Nintendo hard level of play.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like, it's very weird when you play like modern games now and you don't even really think about it, and then you go back and you play like a Sega game or a Nintendo game, and you're just like, I still can't beat this. I thought it was just a matter of I was a kid and I wasn't concentrating. No, this is actually really hard. It's really true.
Yeah, I mean, only a couple weeks ago I beat Mega Man.
I will never...
For the first time in ever.
I will never beat a Mega Man game. I just know it's not going to happen. I can try. I can enjoy it. I know I'm never going to beat one.
In the first half, we were talking about... You were talking about how we had... Video games in the 90s were all about mascots, and how they were, they were tied to the company as opposed to just franchises. The first Sega mascot, even though he was kind of an unofficial mascot, was Alex Kidd.
Now, Alex Kidd, I don't remember.
Well, that's not a surprise. I mean, he was very, very early in Sega's lifestyle. I mean, the first game was called Alex Kidd in Miracle World.
Okay.
And it actually came out first for the Sega Master System.
Ah, alright.
Which was in 1986, 1987. So 4 years after that, Sonic would come out. But for a while, he had a series of games. And he was kind of the unofficial Sega mascot. So one of his claims to fame is that his primary power is punching. Mario jumps, Alex Kidd punches.
Okay.
So...
And then Sonic just blew him out of the water.
Yeah, after Sonic came along, Alex Kidd kind of joined Oswald in the neglected mascot department.
Oh, poor Oswald.
So Alex Kidd, though, was a game I never really played. I mean, I'd heard of it, but never got into. You can get, I mean, the games are available. I know. I mean, one of the great things about a lot of these older games is that a lot of them are being released to the public today, whether through Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, or Virtual Console, or coming out on like compilation discs. So that's one of the great things. They're not going away.
Which is wonderful because, like, the fact of the matter is, and I think it's like, probably realizing a need for this, but, the Genesises are, most people's Genesis are broken or not working anymore, or the cartridges aren't working. Like, there's a want and need to have those games back. So it's a very smart business decision, quite frankly, to find ways to bring these games back on modern consoles, because people will pay for them for the nostalgia alone.
Oh yeah, definitely the nostalgia factor. And eventually, when I have kids, I'm gonna start the kids on these games. It's like, okay, I want you to experience pain like I did.
Exactly.
I want you to experience how unforgiving these games are.
That's so true.
Where kids today with their auto-save and their memory cards and their... No, we had passwords, and you're gonna like them.
You're gonna write them down, or either that, you're gonna not turn your console off, and then your mom's gonna come by and be like, "Why is this still on?" and shut it off.
Yep.
After dinner, after you spent 8 hours like on that one spot, it's like, why did you do that?
Exactly. Or the game freezes on you.
Yep, that too.
that was the primary reason why I never beat the original Mario Brothers as a kid, because I'd leave it on, I'd go to school, and I'd come back and the game froze. Like, you jerk!
The things we dealt with.
Yes, back in our day.
Yeah.
Moving right along, Sega also wanted to get in on the RPG world as well. I mean, Nintendo was raking in the money with Final Fantasy. So Sega said, all right, well, we'll do something as well. We'll call it Phantasy Star, which I've played, and I'm currently playing the first 3.
Yeah, Phantasy Star is definitely one of my bucket list games. Because I didn't get into RPGs until I was like in college. So like I'm going back now and being like, how did I miss this series?
And I mean, the difference between Phantasy Star and Final Fantasy, early Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy is much more medieval based. It has sort of that medieval Middle Ages vibe to it.
Right.
Whereas Phantasy Star, every single game in the Phantasy Star universe is kind of science fantasy. A lot of them take place in space. They're all on space, alien worlds. And it's a totally different feel.
It's like the original precursor to Mass Effect. When you think about it.
Kind of, but without the sex.
Well, yeah, but there's no alien love, but
no, none of that.
Back then you could just get that from Star Trek and you're fine.
Yes. Absolutely. And again, Phantasy Star, the Phantasy Star 1 in particular is incredibly difficult because you'll be dungeon exploring, and the way they set up the dungeons in the first game, whenever you walk into a dungeon, the perspective changes. It is no longer a top-down view, but do you remember the maze screensaver from like Windows 95?
Yes, I do. It's like that?
When you enter a dungeon, it shifts into that it shifts into basically first-person perspective.
Oh, that's amazing.
And because of the limits of the technology, you'll be in you'll be the only person in your party. You'll only have one character, and say you'll face 5 enemies in a row, but because of the limits of the cartridge, only one enemy is shown on the screen at the same time.
Whoops.
So you only see one avatar for an enemy, but there's 5 of them. And the only way you know that is that on the right of the screen, the top right, it shows the HP for every single one of them.
Oh, wow.
So you think like, hey, I killed you, but wait a minute, there's 4 more of you.
That's kind of mean. It's like, yay, alright, I kicked its ass, and it's still here. Oh, wait, there's 4 of them. I haven't even been paying attention.
Yeah. It later in the later games, as they improve the technology on the cartridges, then we finally were like, oh, yay, we can get multiple on screen now.
Yeah.
It was the same thing with Dragon Warrior for the NES. It was just, your one hero, that was it, and it was always 1-on-1.
Right.
But Golden Axe was like, nope. Not Golden Axe. Phantasy Star was like, nope. Absolutely not. But again, all these games are still available. So there you are.
Well, I have a few more cult classics I'd like to bring up.
Go ahead!
Well, one is Michael Jackson's Moonwalker.
I never even heard of that, but it doesn't surprise me at all.
This was the age of Michael when he could. It was before things started going bad and when he could do no wrong. Going bad, no pun intended, because the game because the game was actually based on the short film that was made around the time of Bad that was called Moonwalker, which was Michael Jackson. And it's kind of a bizarre movie. It's Michael Jackson, running around. Joe Pesci's a bad guy in it. It's kind of... But anyways, that's what the whole entire game is based off of. And I know how this sounds now, but in the game, you have to... One of the points of the game is to save children. You have to go and you start a level and you have to find all these hidden kids and free them. I know how bad that sounds, but the game is amazing. I mean, the game opens up with like Michael walks into like basically what looks like the set of the Smooth Criminal music video. He flips a coin into the jukebox, and the game begins. And you hear the song "Smooth Criminal," and you basically have to go through and beat up all these bad guys. But Michael has a special move that makes everyone on screen dance, and then they all pass out.
Okay.
It's so it's silly, but it's just like this cult classic game where like all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, you do your special move and everyone starts doing the Thriller dance, and then it takes out all the bad guys on screen.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia page. He also has a power-up of his chimp.
Oh no, his monkey Bubbles, he takes you to the boss. So like after you find all the kids, like, you know, you have to find like 3 kids in a level or whatever, Bubbles shows up and he starts pointing you where to go so you can find the final boss.
Okay.
It's totally silly, but
oh, I bet.
But it's also really fun. I mean, you have MIDI versions of Billie Jean and Beat It playing the entire time you're playing the game. It's amazing. So that's one cult classic. Another one, I don't know if this one's actually a cult classic, but I just think it's awesomely bad. I got this game as a kid called Global Gladiators.
No relation to American Gladiators?
No relation at all. And I don't know who was behind this game, but it's a game that's supposed to have a good theory behind it. It's teaching kids about cleaning up the environment or whatever, because you play as these kids named Mick and Mac, and you run around shooting slime and pollution monsters with your little super soaker. But somehow McDonald's was tied into the game, and you run throughout the entire game collecting arches, and every game ends with Ronald McDonald waving a flag at you saying congratulations. It's the most bizarre thing.
Licensing.
Oh, licensing, exactly. But the last game I will mention, which is one of my favorite games of all time, like, and when I say one of my favorite games of all time, I mean, this is a game that sits directly next to Kingdom Hearts in my book.
Oh, wow. All right.
It's a game called Valis. And there's 3 installments, Valis 1, Valis 2, Valis 3. And it's basically, I mean, it's kind of zero-wingish in presentation. There's not as many translation errors, though, but it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up with a superhero female. And, you know, she's like, it's one of those kind of typical stories. She's the chosen one. She gets this sword. She becomes, you know, a fated warrior, as it were. But the game is just, it's beautiful. It's all 3 of them. Dramatic as the games go on. You actually get 2 other heroines that help you out, and you can choose which one you like. You know, one of them's more attack heavy, one's more magic heavy. There's cutscenes, but they're not, and they're dramatic, and they pull you into the game, but they're succinct and they don't go on too long. It's all anime game. It's such a lost classic that I don't understand how it didn't catch on more. Maybe it's because of the time. Maybe if it came out now and there's, you know, more of an anime presence, maybe more people would have gotten into it. But it's just a fantastic, fantastic series.
Valis, did you know there was a Valis 4?
Yeah, that was on Nintendo.
It was on Super Nintendo.
Oh, okay. Super Nintendo, yeah. I just brought up, I mean, these 3 were on Sega, and then the 4th one was on Nintendo. But yeah, and I think in the 4th one, the main character, Yuko, that you've been playing as the entire time, is like kind of like a Obi-Wan-ish kind of figure in the 4th game, and there's a different character.
Ah, okay.
I think that's kind of how they did it, but I mean, it's one of those games where every time I, like, especially Valis 3 is my favorite of all 3. It's hands down the best, and literally every time I pick that game up, like, it just sends chills up my spine. Like, there's a whole opening scene where she, like, jumps off a building and grabs her sword, and then she soars up to the top of the building. It's magnificent. I love this game.
Well, good. I actually never heard of it, so...
Most people have it, but yeah. That's my plug for it. If you can find it, do so.
Go get it. Otherwise, you will be doomed.
I'm doomed to not play a fantastic game. Maybe it's just also because I'm a girl and I'm like, the fact of a game where it's just 3 chicks kicking ass just makes me happy. I mean, it's like the precursor to Sailor Moon.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's awesome, and the music's phenomenal too. I'll leave it at that.
Cool. So, we've brought up a bunch of games, and I'm sure there's a bunch of games that we have not mentioned. So, if we had 5 hours to kill, then maybe we'd do that. But we don't.
I guess we'll just at least say Toe Jam and Earl existed, just so we can say we said it in the podcast.
Okay, yes, it did exist. I never played it, but it did exist.
Yeah.
Okay, some of the peripherals, Sega was not like Nintendo in its peripherals for everything. Unlike the Nintendo, which had the gun, the zapper, the trackpad, the power glove, Rob. None of that. The Sega had only a couple of major ones. One of them that I remember clearly because I saw a friend had this. Do you remember the little lock-on device that would have Sonic and Knuckles, and you could play Sonic 3 with if you put the cartridge on top of this lock-on? You could play Sonic 3 and Knuckles?
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, that answers my question. Well, I had never seen it before, and because I knew that Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles were both separate games. They were both directly related to each other. Sonic and Knuckles immediately followed Sonic 3. But then we had this thing where you could play both of them together. And I think it even worked on the earlier Sonic titles as well.
I know it wasn't compatible with Sonic 1. I think with Sonic 2, it might have just given you the ability to play through the game as Knuckles. I think that was basically the only thing that did, but, I'll look it up.
Well, I have it right here.
Oh, okay, then I won't look it up.
I've got it right here. It was Sonic and Knuckles, and it utilized lock-on technology. Woo. That allowed the Genesis to have access data from both Sonic 2 and Sonic 3. So if you used it with Sonic 3, you'd have Sonic 3 and Knuckles. If you used it with Sonic 2, you would just basically be you'd play Sonic 2, it'd be pretty much identical, but you'd have Knuckles in it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought that's how it was.
And with Sonic 1, as soon as you turn on the Genesis, a screen with Sonic, Tails, Robotnik, and Knuckles saying "No way," which means it wouldn't work. However, if you pressed the A, B, and C buttons together, you could access a minigame based on the special stages of Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles.
That I didn't know. That's pretty awesome.
So, players can enter a 12-digit code on this screen, with every number combination generating a different variation of the Blue Sphere stage level.
That's pretty awesome. That's really cool.
So basically it only worked with Sonic 2 and Sonic 3. The 32X, which was this big honkin' adapter that you put into your Genesis, was basically the precursor to the 32-bit era.
Okay, is that what that was? Because I literally had no idea what the point of it was. It just looked like something that you just jammed into your Genesis, and I had no idea what exactly... I wasn't sure if it was like a Game Genie. Like, I had no idea what that thing's function was.
No, it had you plugged it into your Genesis through the game slot, and it expanded the capabilities of the Genesis to allow 32-bit games. So basically, this was kind of like the halfway point between Genesis and Sega Saturn.
Okay, it was just carrying on the whole bit wars, 16-bit, 32-bit, all that, all that jazz.
all that jazz, but I mean, it was kind of a commercial failure. because because the 32X had its own library of games. It could not use Genesis cartridges. The 32X had its own specific games.
And you think about it, and it's like parents at the time are going to be like, why do you need this? You already have a Genesis. End of conversation. I mean, that's probably the biggest reason why it didn't sell.
There were only 40 games for the 32X. There was a few of them that looked good in 32X, like Virtua Fighter. Even though the 32X was capable of better graphics and sound, most games for the 32X did not take advantage of its hardware. So, it was one of those things where Sega tried to get a jump on the next gen, and it was kind of a rush job.
They tried to jump to it, and they didn't jump far enough.
They rushed it, and it shows. And then the other major peripheral that they had that you could attach to the Genesis was the Sega CD.
Now, the few things I know about the Sega CD is that actually did capture like full video, right? Like full motion video, like actual people.
It allowed the user to play CD games.
Right.
It did allow full motion video games.
Right.
Which led to the game that caused a lot of controversy called Night Trap.
Yeah. That one's a cult classic. But...
Yep. And then, of course, we had Sonic CD and Lunar Eternal Blue. But again, it was also considered a kind of failure because a lot of the games for the Sega CD were just kind of ports of Genesis games.
I just remember, like, that horrible ad with, like, the kid playing, like, something... He was playing, like, I guess, Sega or whatever, and there's, like, a guy that basically looks like Chuck D of Public Enemy comes up on screen and he's like, you don't have a Sega CD yet? And, like, all of a sudden they're, like, show them what the games look like, and they look dated and silly at this point, but, like... Because Sega were, like, that entire company, their art form and advertising was putting down the other guy, and, like, everyone was, like, and either that or being extreme because it was the 90s, and everything was extreme. And the ads now are just laughable, but I remember the Sega CD one being particularly silly.
Extreme!
Yeah, exactly.
With that sort of voice and dropping the first E, so it was just extreme.
Yeah, big X stream.
And, I know Sega CD, they were trying to get into the next gen because, at this point, Sega CD came out in... Hold on. It came out in 92. It was earlier than I thought. But,
wow.
Yeah, but it was $300. So...
Yeah.
And, they were starting to getting set for PlayStation, which came out in 95, but, we had Sega Saturn. So, Sega was trying to one-up Nintendo by switching away from cartridges. And, Sega had a lot of ideas that were way ahead of its time, but in trying to be first and the most innovative, they end up rushing a lot of stuff, and, it led to their end, ultimately.
Well, it's crazy to look back on it now and see, like, you're exactly right. They were really ahead of their time in a lot of things, but the culture wasn't there yet, The buying community wasn't there yet, and they kind of couldn't wrap their heads around that kind of thing yet, I think.
Yeah, it was weird to say the least. I didn't play CD-based games until PlayStation, so I never owned Sega CD or anything like that.
Well, yeah, me neither. And I think it's weird to think about now because now we're used to having console units that multitask and that have internet and that you watch Netflix on and all this other stuff. Back then, a video game system was a video game system. It was just a straight console, and you just played your games on it, and the games were all, for the most part, rather simplistic. So I think one of the reasons why these things tanked was just because, like I said, people weren't thinking about video games in that term yet, and they, in turn, are like, I'm not going to spend money on that. I don't need it. It hadn't caught on yet because at the time, everyone's fine just sticking a cartridge in a console and just playing it, and you don't really need the better graphics yet. You don't really need the, all these peripherals. Like, it didn't seem necessary yet.
And, despite, some of the great games that were on the Genesis, Nintendo was still far and away the winner. It had, at this point, Super Nintendo, and, although Sega did get some very, very, some good hits against Nintendo, if we remember.
Oh, yeah.
If we remember the whole Mortal Kombat 1 controversy.
Oh, yeah. They get the blood, they win.
Yeah. No, that was just funny. That was one of those Nintendo womp womp moments. You can release this fighting game on our console, but only if you remove the blood. You sure? Yes, absolutely. Okay. And Sega's like, what? Nintendo won't let you have blood? Come release the game on our system. It'll have as much blood as you want. Mortal Kombat 1 sells much better on Genesis than Super Nintendo.
Because Genesis is extreme.
Extreme!
I mean, you think about it, that was even the entire marketing ploy of Sega. I mean, the fact that, they made the system black. You look at the controllers, and they kind of, they had that look to them that was so different than a Nintendo's boxy controllers. I mean, there was a whole aesthetic thing in the Genesis and everything that it created after that.
Gray and black.
Yep.
And, that is true. They really tried to be all very 90s with their fast mascots and their colors and their everything, really. And you're right. I remember a lot of their ads was putting down Nintendo. I mean, we all remember the Sega does what NintenDONT ad. Yeah. Although, I seem to remember that just the 90s in general, toys and games, there was this definite theme of, post-apocalyptic, Crossfire, for example.
Yeah.
Everything. And, I never owned Crossfire, but I really wanted to so that I could be a reject from the set of Mad Max as well. It was just...
No, that was a definite, that wasn't just the Genesis. That was a 90s thing.
Yeah.
To make everything kind of seem a lot tougher, more cutting edge, or... Because, it's just like, I guess, anything else. You target to a younger generation, they don't want to be like their parents. So they try to make everything, for us, they just tried to make it more extreme.
Extreme!
Extreme, yeah, exactly.
And... and even then they were trying to appeal, Sega Genesis, when it launched in the US, was a whole $10 cheaper than the Super Nintendo.
A whole $10.
A whole $10, and, the best selling game, just some facts for you, the number one selling game for the Genesis was... Sonic the Hedgehog 1. It sold 15 million.
That totally makes sense.
Unfortunately, the best-selling game for the Super Nintendo was Super Mario World. That was 20 million.
Ah.
So, and just in terms of worldwide sales, when you would talk about the console wars of the 90s, I mean, they were pretty close. The Super Nintendo sold a little over 49 million units. The Genesis sold 40.
Oh, wow.
So, Nintendo won the sales war, but not by, not by a whole lot, relatively speaking. So, I mean, it was on.
And meanwhile, all the little Atari consoles are crying in the corner, like the Jaguar and all those ones. Like, wait, what about
What
us?
about us? You that they were popular for all of 3 weeks.
Yeah, or what was the other one? The
Lynx?
no, the Lynx was the handheld, but wasn't there like a 52 or a 72? Like a, I know they kept upping numbers and then they turned to cats.
Yeah. Then well, we had in the same generation for the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, we had the TurboGrafx 16.
Right.
You had the Neo Geo. And then for handhelds, you had, well, the Lynx was the handheld. You had the Game Boy, the Game Gear, and the Turbo Express.
And then a slew of Tiger electronic games, which took 2 batteries.
Which were fun. But that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, but like, overall, when you look at all those consoles at the time, it's like Genesis was a solid second or alternative to Nintendo. Like it definitely had a wild heyday.
It most certainly did, and for it lasting, it was right up there with Nintendo. I mean, as I said, I didn't own a Genesis until I was in high school, and by that point, PS2 and GameCube were in play. But
Right.
and even though I was a lot more playing Nintendo titles than Sega titles, I mean, the Genesis was a blast.
Absolutely.
I mean, it took a while to get used to the 3 buttons on the controllers, and for some of them, the 6. Remember the 6-button?
Oh yeah.
So, although it worked,
6-button beast.
although it worked in racing games like Road Rash, but yeah, well done for Sega. Now they just, sell Sonic out to the highest bidder.
Well, they still make some good, solid games. I mean, they did Mad World, which was a great game for the Wii.
So, Sega's still around, they're just not making consoles anymore, so. Any final words you have to say on the subject?
I guess one more thing, which I completely forgot about and is completely hilarious. Do you remember the 7-Up spot? Like the actual mascot for 7-Up at one point, which was a red spot with sunglasses?
Yes.
That had a Sega game.
I'm not surprised. I mean, it was also the era of licensing everything.
Everything. I think Chester Cheetah had a game from the Cheetos. There was a lot of random food and company mascots that had video games for no reason.
Yeah, like I said, it was the age of licensing.
Yep.
Everything. I'm sure even Burger King had some games, and
Well, Burger King had an Xbox game, which is actually really fun. Sneaking is actually very, very fun. I'm not even joking about that. Me and a couple friends really played that for hours one night, and it's completely silly. And it's just you literally sneak up on people and present them with burgers in very pronounced, flourished ways. But it's the most hilarious and fun game I've played in a long time.
So, happy anniversary, Sega. Thank you for giving us the Genesis. And, even though the system is long dead and gone, a lot of the games are still alive and can still be very readily obtainable today. So, good on you. You've got some lasting games that are still, 25 years later, still a lot of fun to play. So, I think that will wrap it up, unless you have anything else to say.
Nope, I am set.
You are all set. You've been sated. So, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, you want to give us your nostalgic memories of the Sega Genesis, or you have anything else you want to say on this or any other episode of Downloadable Content, you can get a hold of us in a variety of ways. You can go on our Facebook page, facebook.com/DLContent, Twitter @DLContent, Tumblr, dlcpodcast.tumblr.com. You can email us at dlcontent1@gmail.com. And as always, all episodes can be found on iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher. So again, a bunch of different ways to get downloadable content into your ears. Take that as you will. So, I think that'll do it for us. So it remains for me to thank Shanna And only Shanna. It was the Shanna show today.
Glad I could be here.
Always nice to have you. You're slowly adding an episode tally. I think this is your 13th, so...
I'm still nowhere near Ron, though.
No.
I don't think I'll ever catch up to Ron.
No, you'd have to be on like every episode for the rest of like the next 2 years.
Yeah, I don't think I'll catch up to him. He's got the lead.
He has the lead, and he was supposed to be on this episode, but work happened at the last second because retail.
Curse you, means of employment and money making.
No, responsibility. Blow me.
Ugh.
All right, everyone. I'm Brian. Have a good one, everybody.